Hello everybody, welcome to the Wonky Angle, where I talk about electronic music, both new and old. And today I'm going to be talking about the third full-length album from Air, Talkie, Walkie. This album has been very difficult to look at with fresh eyes. The thing is, when I think about Air's usual sound, it's not Moon Safari that comes to mind, it's this album. Maybe it's just that I've listened to this album so many times over the years, maybe it's that I've known this album for just as long as Moon Safari, but I kinda have difficulty trying to imagine what this album would have been like to an Air fan from 2004 when this came out. Because the themes and sounds explored on this album have more or less dominated Air's sound for all their subsequent albums. In a way, though, I suppose it combines the sounds of both Moon Safari and 10,000 Hertz Legend. It's got the warmness and emotion of the former, and some of the darker tones and rock influences of the latter. This album definitely felt much more human-sounding than either of those two, though, probably because of the completely unfiltered voice of Jean-Benoit Dunkel. That guy on the right. His voice sounds like at least 3 different people depending on the song. From his more normal sounding lower range, to his female sounding upper range, actually kinda sounding like Beth Hirsch with a thicker accent, to whatever the heck you would call his singing on Run. But anyway, this album is a refreshing return to the more accessible, kinda like the easily digestible version of 10,000 Hertz Legend or something. I've seen people call this album as good as Moon Safari, but not as well remembered, and while I don't think it's quite on that level, I do think this is an excellent album that is worth your time, and anyone planning to become an Air fan absolutely has to hear it. Maybe even start with it. Well, okay, maybe it's not the best jumping on point you could pick, but it would definitely work. Going down track by track, it starts with Venus, which isn't exactly a lyrical masterpiece. It is based around a Together Forever rhyme, and it's kind of driven into the ground. But this song is much better instrumentally, mainly based around sets of 2 weighty piano chords. Do-do, do-do, with lots of ambient synths floating around as well. Cherry Blossom Girl is a much better track, with lots of acoustic guitars and some Japanese sounding banjos here and there, and even some flutes for good measure, all adding up to a very warm and intimate atmosphere. Plus, even though Dunkel pronounces things weird, at least he's not repeating the same lyrics over and over, making this a much more enjoyable song in my eyes. I've just kind of gotten accustomed to Dunkel's accent regardless. It's just part of what makes Air, Air. The only track where his voice ever bothered me, incidentally, is the next track, Run. I don't think it's his accent, though, it's more of his tone of voice. He sounds unnecessarily creepy and stalkerish. Like, maybe that's the point, as the instrumental is subtly creepy in the beginning as well. That being said, even though this song is far more repetitive than Venus, run, 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 I think actually here the repetition isn't quite as annoying, maybe because it doesn't feel as dragged out. Also because, as he says, run, 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 I like how these ambient synth choirs come in to make the song feel warmer. Next is Universal Traveler. This song is structured similar to Run, but is significantly less creepy. There's basically the verse sections, which have Dunkel with an acoustic guitar singing about his traveling in a silver plane, and the chorus sections, which have a lot more ambient textures, and Dunkel slowly singing so far in his female voice. The song later adds on this synth banjo or steel guitar or whatever as well. It's overall a really warm and relaxing track. Then we move on to the first instrumental, Mike Mills, named after the guy who designed the cover of Moon Safari and directed several of their earlier music videos, such as Sexy Boy. This is a definite favorite of mine. It starts out with an off-kilter beat and an arpeggio on an electric piano, with an acoustic guitar, then bringing in these big dreamy pianos, switching back to just the acoustic guitar with some much more subtle synths, and finally in the end bringing in a full orchestra a la Talisman. Love this track. Heck, all the instrumentals here are fantastic, but we'll get to the other two in a bit. Next is Surfing on a Rocket, which is basically an electronic-tinged surf rock tune. It is surprisingly smooth and atmospheric though, because of course it is. And I especially like the bridge, which has all these electronic effects in it. This is also the point at which the album briefly moves into some darker territory again, as seen on the next track. Another Day is not quite as warm and welcoming. It sounds like a lost track from Virgin Suicides turned into a full song. There's the synth harpsichords, a repetitive vocal loop, and these weird, cold, organ-like synth stabs here, and of course the lyrics aren't exactly lovey-dovey either. 'Cause it's just another day, you will lose it anyway. Jeez. Sounds pretty nice though. I like how there's some vibraphones here and there as well. Then we get Alpha Beta Gaga, an instrumental which also kind of starts out with this surf guitar noodling and brings in a really dang catchy melody being whistled and being played on an orchestra later on. Meanwhile, there's tons of electronic effects flying all over the place, calling back to tracks like Les Voyages de Penelope, and a really slow but hard-hitting beat. There's also, once again, a banjo brought in near the end of the track. It's like some kind of theme song to a futuristic western movie. Fantastic song to be sure. Then there's Biological, which is probably the closest we come to a song of the 10,000 Hertz legend mold. First of all, the lyrics are specifically about having sex for procreation, although as the title implies, it's kind of masked under lots of biological talk, and it's once again pretty dang creepy thanks to lines like, "Your blood is red, it's beautiful," "Let's fuse ourselves," and "I want your DNA." Like, good intentions, but it sounds more like a serial murderer or mad scientist than someone expressing their love in biology terms. That might be on purpose though, as the instrumental is also much darker and more ambiguous than some of the earlier songs on here. The instrumental is based around another off-kilter beat, kinda like the one on Mike Mills, with the verses having subtle synth arpeggios and ghostly wind noises, and the chorus having those arpeggios too, and yes, another banjo. Oh, and orchestras, gotta have orchestras. But the best part of this song is the outro, which has a lot more guitars and weird electronic effects that sound like X-ray scanners or something, sounding kinda like several different sections of Sex-Born Poison, albeit relatively warmer and more comfortable. I never really liked this one as a kid, but like those weird parts of 10,000 Hertz Legend, it's been a real grower over the years. But after a weird song like that, we finish off with Alone in Kyoto, which is far and away the best ending to an Air album we've ever gotten. It starts out with lots of weird abstract synth bell noises, bringing in a subtle synth melody, and later some nice comfortable acoustic guitars and pianos, with I think a synth harmonica or something thrown in for atmospheric purposes, and some orchestral bells as well, with finally this amazing outro done almost entirely on the piano, and ending out with lots of beach sound effects. It's almost like a throwback to Premier Symptomes, but maybe even more soothing than any song on there. It's not every day that Air finish off on such a high note, which makes this track all the more special. So overall, this album has a ton to like about it. There's plenty of emotion, warm acoustic textures, and interesting electronic textures as well. I do still much prefer Moon Safari to this, and saying that it's some kind of overlooked classic seems pushing it a bit, especially considering how many people seem to overlook 10,000 Hertz Legend, but it very much feels like Air at their very core. Nothing fancy, no cool science fiction themes, well, okay, aside from Universal Traveler and Surfing on a Rocket, and I guess Alpha Beta Gaga too. But mostly it's just pure, simple, but powerful mood pieces. Sure, it's not as good as their first two in my opinion, but that doesn't make it any less worth checking out. This is what Air is all about. I'm overall feeling an 8.5 out of 10. Favorite tracks: Cherry Blossom Girl, Universal Traveler, Mike Mills, Surfing on a Rocket, Alpha Beta Gaga, Biological, and Alone in Kyoto. Least favorite track, run. But of course, this is just my opinion. You can feel free to disagree with it, but I'd like to hear your thoughts, so leave the comments in the comment thing down there. But yeah, that's pretty much it. That's all for today. See you next time.